would prefer to address the agenda item related to the safety plan in his executive director report at the full board meeting. Is that acceptable by the commissioners? Okay, I see Aioli shaking his head. Kay?
This is Paulette. Why? I'm just curious.
Jim?
Well, safety is so important. I wanted the whole board to have it and make sure it's in the minutes for the board. We are still have a couple of administrative adjustments to the annual plan that was the subject of was the principal topic last Thursday, and we only sent you the plan on Friday, I think. So I'll give you a chance to review it next month. We'll vote on it in August, and it's an issue important enough to cover for the whole board, not just for a single committee.
Thank you.
So, Jim?
Yes.
Oops. Yes. So you'll go over this at the August board meeting? Is that what you're saying?
Right. So I'll cover an executive director's update, our standing safety program that's been around for quite some time. And I'll cover what we've done on COVID, most of which I think everyone's aware of. That'll be the part of the update. What we asked last Thursday, although it's not particularly time sensitive, is that annually or periodically we have to update our safety plan, the written plan, for the agency, submitted to HUD, OSHA, state, and at least those three. There might be another couple. We're roughly due to do that. When we gave you the presentation, look on me, we didn't provide you the whole plan. So we were asking you could construe it. We're asking you to review a plan without providing the plan for you to read. We provided that to you either late Thursday or Friday. I'm not sure exactly when. It's pretty lengthy. As we have a new board, you may wish to review it completely, but we're going to ask the board in August to vote in resolution on approving the updated plan in which we provided you. So today it's an update administrative to cover safety, our program, our plan as it exists, plus some comments on COVID as a board update to familiarize you. And then we'll circle back in August, have a brief Human Resources Committee meeting in case there's any questions on the plan that the commissioners may have the next month, and then ask you to vote to approve the plan with some very small changes, frankly, no large changes to it, so that we're appropriately aligned and can turn in a current plan to the authorities having jurisdiction. Does that answer your question, Kay?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And so with that, we are going to resume our agenda from our previous joint committee meeting, and I believe we are going to continue the presentation on the redevelopment districts at TIP. So with that, I believe I'm turning the floor over to Joe.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Glad to be here, glad to see everybody. The presentation we started last month, we kind of got through all of the background of how we have worked in the past, all the way up to how we are working in the present. And right now, I would like to start with our tax increment formulating committee, whose recommendation became final last year, May of last year. It was done. Paulette was on that committee. At the time, she was not commissioner. Commissioner Chair Bone, Charles Bone, was on the committee representing MDHA at that time. So I'm pleased that we had a representative at the time that it was going. Now we have a representative still on our committee today. And so I think we'll be able to express what I had heard, and we'll also hopefully Commissioner Coleman will be able to chime in on some other things about this as it goes. So I am going to attempt to share the file so everybody will know where we are. We are starting on page 19 that you had under tax increment formulating committee. So I hope some of these other things off of that. I hope everybody can see where we are.
Is this actual page 19, Joe, or just some made up page 19 that's actually page 44? That's actually page 76? Too soon? Too soon. Okay.
Thank you. So now if I can go to the next page, I'll be even doing better, but may not be able to do that. I don't know why the pages don't move. All right, the committee recommendations on the following page. As I said, the committee all met. They met, I believe, starting in September, October of 2018. It was a committee that was formed at the request of Metro Council to take a look at how tax increment financing is used, what is good about it, what is bad about it, and just to find out some more information. Councilmember Mendez, who was the chair of this committee, and it had 7 representatives. Metro Finance was on the committee. That was then Director Talia Lomax was on that representing Metro. We had 2 representatives, as I said, Charles Robert Bone and Bert Matthews were on there for MDHA as well, and it was well represented. And a lot of information was learned through that. Generally, what came out of the observations that were made was to increase transparency. Actually, you know, while everybody was so concerned about the money being given away, as they would like to say that we were giving the money away, at the end of the day, the committee wanted to make the incentives more readily available. That means to more smaller projects, more local developers, that this benefit can be done on a smaller scale, in addition to the high rises that we see and some of these other projects going through. The other issue, and this was brought up, it's been brought up over the last several years, is the predictability of how much tax increment financing we're going to be asking from Metro on an annualized basis. And they wanted to see more work with us, collaboration with Metro departments. I have a comment for that. I think that was not, I think the collaboration is very good. I think they were basing that on some things in years past. But we have gotten compliments from the Director's Finance Office of how well things are working together and some other things associated with that. And we do work extremely well with the planning department as part of what's going on. So, but those were the generalities of it. It was narrowed down into, I say it was narrowed down, it was expanded out into categories. And we briefly kind of crunched these down into single posts to let everybody know where this stands. The first was, as you can see here, was to create a single portal where everybody can go in, see, and have a map that is available where the redevelopment districts are and what work has been done by the study group. And so we have that. We have a link to all of the work that was done. That's on our website. All the work that was done by the committee is there. We have the map is on a test phase right now, but all the redevelopment districts are on Metro's mapping. And we have a test page right now with our individual projects that are also on Metro GIS. We're real close to finalizing that one to make it go live, where there will just be a layer as you go through Metro's GIS to be able to click on a parcel and it will pop up and say, this was the Bell South building, now the AT&T building. It was a tax increment financing project back in 1993, I think, and this was the amount of the TIF loan, and it's paid off. And some very kind of basic information about the project just by clicking on the parcel inside Metro GIS. Number 2 is working with key stakeholders and community groups to give more education and about how TIF works. And we had a lot of discussion about this, started the discussion around with how this should take place. And we're probably at the point of this was going to come after a few of these other steps, so we could, so that we would be able to give a broad presentation of how things are developing in the future. Unfortunately, with most of these projects, we have put them on hold for the lack of some one-on-one in-face meetings due to COVID. But we are still working on those on how to do a presentation similar to what we would do as I am giving a presentation to you on how TIF works.
Joe?
Yes.
Have the key stakeholders and community groups been identified and a list put together?
No, we have not done that. They would be the ones inside the redevelopment districts.
Okay.
Because obviously we can't do TIF outside of the redevelopment districts. And so we have mailing lists, and we have lists of those individuals in there to be able to contact them. And we do have some other ways to be able to contact folks, but it's inside the redevelopment districts is where we would be reaching out on this.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Sorry, can I also recommend that we also invite media to those education?
Yes, one of the recommendations that came out of the when we were kind of putting our heads together and discussing this, we have a smaller working group that included Metro Finance, the mayor's office, and the planning department and MDHA. One of the recommendations that came out of our small working group that we were doing is we would actually record one of these presentations and have it available online, though, so that anybody would be able to take a look at it in the future as well. So not only would we go out in person to do it, but after we've done that, people will be able to take a look at it and be able to see it one-on-one. But I think that's a very good recommendation. The third item listed down here is posting our agendas online. There is this thought that MDHA is doing lots of things inside a vacuum where people don't know about. This is one of the items that was taken almost immediately upon the recommendations. Actually, we were doing a lot of this before these recommendations actually came out, but it has been expanded during this course of time. Our TIF reporting that we post online carries it's fairly detailed. We actually list every single parcel of property which we collected increment from. So we are reformatting how that will look to make it a little bit easier for people to read. We actually our data that goes online in our report shows all the TIF loans, the TIF balances, what's been paid off and our remaining balances. And so all of the detail is on there. I think we cover all of that in our reporting from a fairly straightforward methodology. Continuing on with the recommendations, the next one was in addition to our, and some of these kind of overlap a bit, in addition to our kind of 101 education that would be given to the general public, is we would also create a little booklet that people be able to get, be able to grab some information, very quickly in a 1 or 2 page summary of what is going on. This is one of the things that led us to let's post online also our education, so people will be able to see everything that's out there, and hopefully will be can educate themselves in how the process works. Number 6, and this was one of the concerns that came out, and I think it's well documented. And Matt was, of course, in the ECD's office and the mayor's office. He left and came over to MDHA. Jamari took over at the mayor's office, operating the ECD, and he has subsequently left. And there's not a designated out chief head point over at the mayor's office right now. The idea behind this was that anybody who is requesting a financial or some other type of incentive to come into Nashville to do a project, that request would initially go to a single point of entry. It's a very logical request that would come in, and that single point, being the ECD director, would sit there and go, okay, they are requesting ABC. Well, you know, there's home money over here that can help with that, or there's Barnes funds over here that can help with that, or there's tax increment financing that can help with that, or we have an incentive project on per jobs that goes through the ECD office at Metro Council, and we can help you with that, or we can go to the IDB board. And so it was that central point then could disperse where it goes to. So they would sit there and go, okay, send your request to MDHA. That way, the mayor's office is informed immediately of what their request was, and so you keep that information in the administrative in the administration at the mayor's office, and we would then pick up those applications and be able to see, do they qualify, you know, and do our full analysis at that point in time. But in the meantime, the initial request would have started there. Moving on, number 7, this goes back.
So before you move on, so
Please.
now what? So now there is no one there. And
Correct.
whoever's there needs to have a pretty thorough understanding of these other programs as opposed to a surface understanding. So I guess my question is, now what?
There are staff over there who do understand a lot of this, enough that there are you know, certain avenues that individuals could go down, and most of these requests, as always, have generally begun somewhere in the mayor's office, either with the mayor, deputy mayor, or someone in there coming through. And, you know, council members have have stepped in at times and have made recommendations on those, and in the finance department in there. But you're right. Without there being a single point of contact, this is one of the things that we do need to, again, re-engage with Metro and discuss how are we going to put this in place. And so for right now, again, with hopefully Metro will get back in and we'll be back to back in full working, and we'll be able to re-engage these discussions and figure out how those applications want to work. Right now, there are no applications coming in that we have seen. So we are, and if one would come in, we would just pass it up the chain so people would understand what it is that's being requested. Number 7, this again goes back to what I talked to previously about lowering the barriers of entry for small TIF loans. What can be done? TIF loans are generally difficult because they require the developer to guarantee those loans. On the small projects, what is often seen is that the developer himself is getting quite, he's leveraging just about everything he can already to be able to get the project done. And there may not be anything else in there to help guarantee the TIF loan portion. And so this is to come up with ways and ideas of how there can be a guarantee, how loans could perhaps be made without requiring a guarantor. We have not explored this. Again, we put together a working group. We met like 2 or 3 times. We met in the fall. We met again in the spring before the COVID, but we did not get to hash this one out anymore. The evaluate the possibility of of developing a tool or program that would reduce or eliminate barriers of redevelopment districts. Again, this all goes together to how to make applying for a TIF loan easier for the individuals on specific projects. And I'm going to get to the specific projects here in just a minute. Nine deals again with reporting and how things can work better, and how the general community can get to know what's going on. Number 10 was how much TIF can we put into a project. This was already implemented. Several of the redevelopment plans were amended back before the last term completed, and one of the amendments that went through stated that MDHA should use 75% as the standard amount of tax increment that can go to any particular project. MDHA had previously pledged 100% of the increment for a loan. You had the base year taxes and you had the incremental taxes, and we would pledge the incremental taxes that were over and above what the taxes were before the project begun. During the last 3 years now, we have backed out all of the taxes for the bonded debt that had came out of that. And so we're down around 80% is the rough number. About 20% of the property taxes are pledged to debt. And then now what they have requested is that the idea is Metro wanting more of the increase of the property taxes to come into Metro to help balance their budgets. And they believe that MDHA should not pledge more than 75% of the increment to any new TIF loan unless MDHA and the board feel like it is justified. So we do have the ability, you have the ability as the board to say, no, we think this project this is a really worthwhile project. It's going to need a little bit more of a bump, and we ought to give it a little bit more of a bump than just the 75%. Likewise, if it's the project that we don't think it needs that much of a bump because, for instance, it's affordable housing where they got Barnes Fund put into it, or they got some other type of financing in it, and it only has a smaller gap, we may only pledge lesser amount of the property taxes to retire the TIF loan. I hope am I doing all right with everybody? Questions?
Does anyone have a question?
Yes. So, Joe, the analysis of this is performed by what entity?
That's our department. We do the analysis of the projects.
Okay.
Similar to the pilots, when the pilots come in. That is what my department does.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, number 11. This is to answer your question, okay? It would have us go to Metro Finance before we award a project and say, this is the analysis that we've done on this project. We think that this project is going to generate X amount of dollars in new property taxes. Do you agree with us on this before we enter into the loan? And so Metro would have a review of some TIF loans at a threshold, so that everybody can kind of put their heads together and go, okay, we get it. We get why, we understand your logic, why you're recommending the approval of this, and we get where you came from on your numbers on how you're estimating how much increment is going to be generated with that. And so that's bringing in another kind of check on what it is that MDHA is doing. It goes back a little bit. Prior to this study, or when this study first was beginning, the study group was putting together, there was talk about all TIF loans going back to Metro Council to review. And I think once the committee members got into it and they saw how the process was taking place, they became much more comfortable with that and say, okay, we see how MDHA is doing this, it's working. Let's just get them to bounce off, since there's actually money that's going to be coming out of Metro to fund these. Let's make sure Metro Finance understands how much tax increment is going to be coming off on these new projects. And so this was a positive in there. So any TIF loan that was $3 million, we would run that by Metro Finance so that they could concur with our analysis on those. Again, not much different than what we do with our pilots program, where those are being reviewed by Metro as well when they go through the process. Number 12, amending the redevelopment plans so that there will be a reassessment of each plan every 7 years. The purpose behind this is that our plans are created for a 30-year time frame, and we intentionally set some large goals for the district that are also broad-based, and we would say, you know, we need office, and we need residential, and we need affordable housing, and we need retail. But obviously, the immediate need for those specific uses are going to come and change in flux. Open space is going to come in and say, we need more open space in there. And so the study recommended us going back to each redevelopment district over every 7 years, so that we can prioritize for the next 7 years what types of projects we would like to see take place inside the redevelopment districts. This got put into an amendment that went into the plans. And so now it's one that must be done on an ongoing basis. We have had priorities that we have been following. We've been doing that for the last probably close to the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years, that we have been doing priorities, taking a look at that of what an area needs for that to enhance that district over the future. So we're ready to begin that process. We've actually started pulling data to go out and have community meetings. We're going to take a look at the Jefferson Street area, Jefferson Street Redevelopment District, Phillips Jackson Redevelopment District, Arts Center Redevelopment District, and go out into the community, take a look at those and what is needed out into those areas. Unfortunately, it's hard to do these types of meetings in a large group where you're giving a presentation, you're getting a whole lot of question and answer coming back in large groups where you're not in person. So to 60 days, we'll be able to start meeting in person on these and be able to continue or be able to begin the in-person meetings on this. These are the number 13. Metro Council can plan amendment to approve where to create a new redevelopment district. This has been going on for a while. We're generally getting great guidance out of Metro, out of the administration, and out of the planning department. With the planning department being much more active over the last 10 years, they have been taking a more of this role as to what places need the most attention that can work through. So those are some, again, the process of cooperation between MDHA and other Metro departments. The design review process, MDHA runs a design review process inside the redevelopment districts. The only other design review process that is done is Metro is done by the planning department. we mirror ours pretty well together on how the process works. And we continue to try and streamline these so they are working in tandem together. Inside downtown, if you recall the maps, our maps are we're drawn around some blighted areas that were done in there, and so we will have one half of a street will be in one of our districts. Well, actually, we try not to do that. Actually, we would have both sides of the street. Sometimes the planning department has only one side of the street drawn into a district, and so we will be looking at. We will both be looking at a building and trying to get the best set of rules that apply to these as we work them together. We have design guidelines that fairly well mirror up with what the downtown codes are, and we work very well together. I think if you were to talk to them down at the planning department, I think you would hear them say that we have a very good relationship and have been very successful in working together on in the design review process and permitting process. Number 16 was about IDB and the IDB's tax increment financing and how that works. Now I skipped my mind; it just went blank. The previous ECD director gave a whole brief on this to the IDB board at that time, and so that kind of got checked off on there. But that was not one that MDHA was actually required to do from there. Any other questions? This is the last of these recommendations.
This is not a question. This is a comment. And I guess one of my concerns is the staff does really wonderful work, but there's always this checking off all the boxes. What does it mean? So how is MDHA going back to see what differences the implementation of these recommendations will have? We always check off the boxes, and when we raise something, it's always, well, we're already doing that. So how do we see the impact and that it actually makes a difference? Because these may not make a difference. They may not yield the results that we anticipate. The committee was very, very concerned about a lot of issues, and we were hoping that these recommendations would resolve those issues. And so how are we measuring that? And when do we step back and take a look and say, yes, this works, no, this doesn't work, or we're not sure?
That's a very good point. And the committee left us a date to come back. And it's in this fall, we are supposed to come back and report on where we are with each of these. I think where we have the most work to do is in the smaller redevelopments. What can we do to help the smaller redevelopment projects? That's the hardest one to do. And that's the one that's going to take the most of us thinking together to come up with a new TIF program that works for a $100,000 loan, for instance. Because there are not the projects are much more geared to the larger scale, and it's just a matter of it's a matter of size and scope that has done that. And so this is what we need to get together with Metro Finance to come up with that plan. And I think that to me is our biggest challenge. What is that one for the smaller group? The other challenge that I see is coming up with the new list of priorities. And these are some things that, depending on how this goes, these are some things that I would really like to get some direct input from the committee members on this as to where we think that we ought to be heading for the next 5-7 years. How often we're going to be coming back and re-looking at each one of these redevelopment districts, say, okay, I think these should be our priorities as we can. I think the other about working together and making things available to the public, that is something that we at MDHA in general have been doing a much better job with over the last couple of years. And I think that's something that you as a board have come in and said, we want to be much more clear on what we're doing and people can understand more of how our processes work. Did I answer your question?
Yes. The other piece is that we had in their provisions for creating a district, and maybe I should know this, but I don't know, have there been examples of modifying a district or changing a district, or is that prohibited?
It is not prohibited. I will touch on that here in 2 pages about how to create a district or what we can do along those lines. As far as it relates to the recommendations up here, I would say it comes in when we go back and re-examine each one of these districts to set our priorities. One of our observations or recommendations we may come back when we do a review of an area is to say, what? I think we're done here. I don't think, I think this has developed just like we wanted to do and it doesn't need anything else. Or we'll come back and say, it has redeveloped exactly like we wanted to do, but it's still missing a grocery store, or it's still missing more open space. And so we as an agency and as a city should be working to, well, that's what we're going to here. If we can find an operator come in and put in a grocery in here, we think it'll be worthwhile investing into that grocery store through tax increment financing, because that's what's needed in here. We don't need to do anything to help support another office building down here. I think affordable housing will always be one we're interested in investing in the future as well. But those are, as the economy was booming, up until COVID came in, pretty much looking at, okay, it's infrastructure that the area needs, and it is affordable housing, and we're much narrowing it down to that. That's pretty much what you're looking at for potential projects.
Yeah, Joe. Paulette, are you? Has your question been sufficiently addressed?
Go ahead, Bailey.
So one of the things I think as a board, and this is kind of sort of primarily for myself, Emily, and Bill, but also for Jim as well, I think a fundamental question we have to answer ourselves about the D in the MDHA is, are we a conduit agency or are we the principal, right? And I'm feeling a bit confused a little bit as to how we're behaving as an agency, because in one minute we say, well, we only do the will of the politicians to a certain degree, and we're simply a conduit for the elected leadership of the metropolitan government and their constituents. But then there are other times it feels like that we're actually communicating to ourselves and to the outside world, and we are the people who determine whether or not the Jefferson Street redevelopment district gets larger or smaller, or whether we're the entity that believes that a grocery store should be there. And so I guess what I'm trying to understand, John, is are we really a conduit, or are we really an economic development of the city, for which we have agency for the D in development?
Yeah, you pose a very good question, and I would tell you, I think it's going to depend on who the crowd to which you are answering that question, as to how the answer will be skewed one way or the other. I firmly believe that we cannot do it ourselves. So that we're going to need the mayor's office of economic development to be part of this. We're going to need the planning department to be part of this. When we move to transit-oriented development districts, we're going to need public works, and we're going to need MTA, RTA to be part of these projects to be able to make them fashion and work. MDHA cannot do this on its own. I think the Donaldson Transit-Oriented Development District that we attempted to pass back at the time that the referendum was going through is a very excellent example of why we must work with these people. The Donaldson Redevelopment District was supposed to be an accompaniment to the referendum on transit. And because there was going to be funding coming in, it was going to examine the entire area, where things are going, where are the residential, what's the average income of that residential, how do we maintain affordable housing in those areas, what all is needed to be able to create the whole neighborhood. The redevelopment district was coming along to say, okay, along this corridor, we're going to need some structured parking because we're going to have to build some parking rides that are going to come in here, be used for the train. We're going to have to see a development take place. We had a partner who was going to be building a library that was getting funds directly from Metro to build a new library out in Donaldson. So it was all intertwined and together as to what MDHA was going to be a part of. When the referendum fell apart and it failed, people still looked at MDHA and said, can you do this? And we're like, no, we don't have the resources to build a library. We don't have the resources to put through that. Our tools in our box that we have are very limited. And so we're going to have the help of these other people. So while I think we lead the development, we can't control all of it that takes place. I think we are the guiding force to be able to say, we see this as an area that needs more work, and we understand that work needs to get done. But there are a lot of places that need work. We can't just take, Council Member Jones and say, all right, we're going to go out here and work in your district because yes, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 things wrong with it. Well, Councilman Smith has 5, 6, 7, 8 things wrong with it. And so why are we not working out there? And at the same time, we can't put a redevelopment district over the entire county because it becomes less effective. So it requires us to go in together. I think we are the group, though, that people should and do look to be able to say, how can we make this work?
Got it. And I guess my question is more about not can we do it, not what can we do, but what should we be doing, right? So Ralph Perry doesn't go and he doesn't initiate any affordable housing project, right? What he has is a set of rules that allows people who actually have projects to evaluate the worthiness of their project for a specific type of funding based on a set of rules and guidelines, right? And so what he's not doing in his office in his agency is saying this is where affordable housing should go in Shelby County, or this is where affordable housing should be going in Horry County. This is where affordable housing should be going in Sumner County. What he's simply saying that in any county or any municipality whose political leadership and its project development leadership wants to execute a project, if you bring me the project and it fits between these rules and there is capacity to do it, we will do it. But he doesn't go and say, I think Donaldson is a place for affordable housing. Let me go engage developers in Donaldson and lay out 4 sides, 4 blocks on the left side of Donaldson Pike and 4 blocks on the south side of Donaldson Pike. It says, here's where THDA wants to see developers come. And so I think that's a bit of the distinction I'm trying to become, because what I believe we were taking is that we are the people saying that the Gulch deserves the money. Well, what we're really saying is the Gulch had a redevelopment district just like everybody else did. somebody came up with a plan and presented a plan that that ran within the guidelines and the rules of our agency and process for executing this money, and we awarded it to them because they were the highest qualified entity to do it.
So, Ailey, this is Jim. Can everybody hear me okay? And I think Joe gave a great answer. And just on evidence, we administer this program. We do not create redevelopment districts at all. And the Donaldson Redevelopment District is a perfect example of what we do not do. We were asked by the sitting mayor at the time to go with the council member, and we had representatives from the mayor's office to use the rules to establish a transportation-oriented redevelopment district. And we worked the staff process to identify what was possible. We ran the charrettes with the public, with the assistance of the council member and the representative from the mayor's office. But we didn't initiate it. We didn't think of it. Wasn't our idea. We simply applied the rules to come up with, and the process to come up with the redevelopment district. And when the time came, the council who controls this said no. So for us, it was a somewhat frustrating event, but that's how it goes. I think that's a good example that we administer. We don't determine where these go. And certainly in my time here, and Joe's been doing it longer than I have never received any TIF application that did not have with it a mayor's, I'll use the word endorsement, but generally it's the proactive endorsement that says, we want this to happen at this location. Can you help with TIF? That's how it always starts, every one that I've done. And I asked Matt, he can't think of any exceptions to that in his tenure. So I think it's pretty clear we administer, we do not initiate, we do not come up with great ideas. Bordeaux is another great example. We were asked by the chief operating officer and the chief finance officer of the administration at the time to convene with them a collaborative approach to Bordeaux and try to come up with some tools. And our tool was a redevelopment district. And from those meetings, we went ahead with mayor requests and support and created a Bordeaux redevelopment district with TIF in it. We've yet to have any TIF requests for it, but we did create it. So I think to me, it's pretty clear. We're administrators. We are not deciders. There are rules we apply, but we don't determine whether there's a Bordeaux district or a Donaldson district. We react to the executive branch as they request and then work it through the legislative process. In terms of application, after the redevelopment district's established, it's been the same experience for me. We don't pursue TIFs until someone's sent to us from the mayor's office. And we haven't had one now in 4+ years. So I think it's, from my seat and stands, we administer, we collaborate, we support, but we are not the developers. We are not the deciders. And at least for me, that's the distinction I've always seen, the one I intend to pursue. And I think that helps. I hope it helps you sort of see how we've applied this.
No, Jim, I think that is the right answer. And I was just looking at all of the 13 or 14 or 15, 16 things that came out of the council's recommendation. It just feels like some of the things that they're laying out. So when you start talking about participation in District X versus District Y, right? Why is all the money going downtown as opposed to going to Bordeaux? And it feels like we're owning some of that. We're owning some of those results, when the reality is we don't control that, right? What I'm saying is, we shouldn't take ourselves down a slippery slope as an agency to then become the arbiter of where funds go based on our judgment. We're simply following the rules that have been established, and we're simply a conduit agency for that. And I think we have to communicate as a conduit agency as opposed to a principal. That's all I'm suggesting.
Fair point. And I think the TIF formulating committee was formed by the administration of the council to study this. So we're reacting again to the legislative and the executive branch's requests and answering administrative questions. But you're right, it's a slippery slope, and we have to be very cautious to make it clear that we administer, we support, we follow the lead of the elected council members and primarily the executive branch, the mayor. But we don't, we don't decide whether TIF X is better than TIF Y. And we shouldn't get in that business. And thus far, I don't think on my watch we have, but that's certainly a great cautionary note, and we need to be very conscious of it.
This is Emily. I'd like to add one caveat to that. I agree with what's being said, and I do believe that we to play in terms of stewarding the objective of equity. And I think that comes in when Joe was mentioning how we're needing to solve for how do we let TIF actually support smaller development projects. Related to that, one question I had is I understand that CDBG is a finite resource, but CDBG can be used for loan guarantees. And there's actually a discussion right now in the House about reauthorizing the home program. And there's consideration about doing a statutory change so that home could also do some loan guarantees. I'm wondering if we've explored that option at all.
Well, the answer is yes. That's the 108 loan program of community development block grants. We just closed out our last loan of that program about February of this year. And the loan value was about $2 million. And what that does for the commissioners is pledge community development block grant funds to the bank over a period of time. And then they in turn loan you money. And our capacity for that, our total capacity at current rates is in the range of 20 to 25 million. But now the downside is once you do that with your CDB monies, they're not available for the programs that we do all the time. So that's always been the trade-off. We have explored it. We have discussed it. We haven't done it with this administration yet, but Board Chair Purcell and I meet with them every 2 weeks now. And I'm sure as we work through this really good process, which is getting a lot of traction, that would be a topic we can explore as a possibility using CDBG funds in the 108 program. We have, but short answer for the commissioners, we have used this program in the past successfully. It is a relatively flexible program. I haven't looked at it in detail in about a year, but it does focus on economic development, but does have opportunities for some help in affordable housing. And we have an internal capacity. If we took every penny of our roughly 8 or 9, or not that much, of about $4 million a year in CDBG funds, if we took all the debt service, we can generate in the range of 20 to 25 million in a single event loan. But again, we take all our CDBG programs off the table. So and Mel may want to talk this, as he does his action plan each year and does the consolidated plan, that is one of the topics that's vetted. And thus far, at least for the people that respond to our public outreach, there's been no appetite to take on a loan in lieu of providing the funds for program support. So I hope does that answer your question, Commissioner?
It does, and I appreciate us exploring it. I certainly am aware that there are trade-offs with that.
This is Paulette again. I think one of the realities that we have to with is whether our role is conduit or administrative or whatever, the generally held perception of our role is much broader. And whenever you go to meetings or when you hear critiques of MDHA, it usually begins with they're the ones with the money, they're the ones with the land, they're the ones, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the challenge may well be anything that MDHA could have or should have done differently that would make for a more equitable, a more, I guess, community-focused orientation toward the perception is to do more creatively and innovatively with development than we have been doing. That may be wrong, very widely held perception.
No, Paula, and I agree with that. I think what we can do as an agency, and again, it gets back to your points about, okay, well, if you do all these things that are lined out in this plan, does it actually change their perception? I think that is a very real That is a very real question. And so I think for us is if you look at bullet number 2, right, on the slide that sits in front of us, right, it really is around what we have the ability to do is to make recommendations to council around what we can fund and where we should fund and what we should do. Is that I think as a board and as an agency, what we should be doing is trying to break down the systematic barriers or the threshold considerations, right, that make it very difficult to do projects in some areas. It makes it more difficult in some areas, right? Mostly because of zoning, right? So I think when you talk about these development districts and you don't talk about zoning, right, you're kind of having a hard conversation because there's plenty of money in the Bordeaux redevelopment district, but when everything is zoned single family and zoned agricultural, then it's very hard to put a big project. We can only build one house on 10 acres of land. You'll never get big projects. And so I think we should be thinking in a way is that it's not just the redevelopment districts alone. It's a combination of that plus zoning, plus the executive that allow these projects to happen. Because if you look where TIF has been funded, it's been funded on projects that have high density. And you need to change the density in the neighborhoods where the money's not being used.
This is Bill Purcell. Can you hear me? I am very appreciative of the comments that we've just heard, and I'm especially appreciative of the issues that have been raised by each of the commissioners. This was exactly the conversation I hope that this presentation would start. And I think it's critically important for me to say at this point that what you've heard presented both by the agency and by each of the commissioners is the wide set of questions that are before the city and before us. Are we reactive or are we proactive? Are we a conduit or are we something more? Are we THDA or are we MDHA? And I don't know that we have to make that decision today. And I would recommend that we not. I think the conversation is exactly the one that I hoped we would have. And most importantly, for me at least, it was the opportunity and remains the opportunity for us to hear as a board the way the agency perceives itself at this time. And once we have a full understanding of both the practice, and I think our executive director did a good job of explaining how he sees it, how he has seen it, how he has been engaging with it, and the way in which the agency, therefore, through leadership, perceives its role and its future. And my thought at the moment, if possible, is for the conversation to continue and the presentation to continue and the questions to be answered. And then at some point, we come back to this as a board. It could be this fall as we're preparing to report back to the council, as Joe indicated, that we come back together as a board and think through what the future is under the circumstances as we find them at that time. But I do think I'm very thankful for the presentations we've had. I'm looking forward to the balance of it. And I think the issues each of the commissioners has raised are indeed the questions that are before us.
This is Paulette. A final comment on this whole thing is, in a vacuum, opportunities exist to be creative, to be very innovative. I think the city is at a very, very critical juncture. And I would like to see MDHA have more of a, if we could even use our bully pulpit, but more of a proactive role in addressing the issues that have been raised and that will be raised.
This is Kay. I would just like to say, regarding assessments, that MDHA has more capacity in the administration around data gathering, data analysis. And that data is very important. And sometimes administrations and councils should be reminded of really what the data shows, so that when requests come up, they can be measured about the impact of the goals on particular districts. And I would suggest also that a relationship, if it's not already there, be established with really good data analysts in terms of incomes and people's incomes and wages and all of that. With the research analysts at Metro Social Services, their department has some of the best that I've seen, and they have great data, and they're my go-to department. Because in my view, what I would want to be able to understand and talk about with the public is what were the goals for this district at this particular time? What's been the impact of TIF dollars? And in particular with affordable housing, where do we stand with it today? X number of units have been produced in this particular district. The public in Bordeaux, we know that zoning is a major barrier there. It's a huge barrier. So then the question is that you apply to that is now what? What could be done and what has to be, who has to come together around that? So I'm particularly interested in measuring and reporting, and you probably already have this, Joe. It's just, I would like to understand that and then make sure that there be maybe an intention of some regular reminding administrations and councils of what the original plan is and the goals and how we're doing against those. People forget things. Thank you.
You are exactly correct about people forgetting things so easily. One of the things where we have taken the most criticism is, what are you doing in the Gulch? Well, it wasn't 10 years ago. You could probably go about 60 miles an hour straight down Granny White to Charlotte Pike without ever having to stop because there was nothing there. And 12th Avenue ran straight into 11th Avenue. So it was a great way to make that happen. So people do have very short-term memories, and it is in where we started and where things are today is immense. And the question is, and this is where I think a lot of the committee was coming from, is when do you let your foot off of the gas pedal and let the development take care of itself? I think we answer that by saying it depends on what that development is. Is it affordable housing? We need to still keep our foot on the gas pedal. Is it a public park? We probably need to keep the foot on the gas pedal because the development has grown around us. So those are the things that this reexamination will do, and we will be able to answer that for everybody to know this is where we're going, this is what we're going to be doing in the future. I believe that it is up to MDHA to do some leading, because if all we're doing is waiting for Metro to tell us what to do, Bordeaux will continue to sit there. Bordeaux Metro owns all of the land over there, and MDHA is not going to rezone that land. Metro government's going to rezone that land. And so unless we come up and lead and say, all right, we're going to do a plan that's going to show the development of what can take place over here. This is what it ought to look like. And we started down this road to come up with essentially what would be a specific plan, an SP zoning that would say, all right, we're looking for buildings in the 3 to 5 story range, and we're looking for them to, and set up an SP plan no different than what's set up going down, major thoroughfares or in other planned developments. And if we want to do that, we have got to get with Metro, and Metro has to agree that they want to do that, but Metro's not going to do it. Metro may allow MDHA to do it and say, okay, go. We want something to take place over here. We got this thing started. You got your one project in there, and we're hearing from other people that they want something to take place too. And so let us move this forward for you, for Metro. Metro right now is not set up to do this. The only other person who does this is the IDB. The IDB grants tax increment financing, but the IDB essentially works for the mayor's office. And the mayor comes up, they get a plan, they run the plan through what it's going to be, they come up with the incentive package of what it's going to be, and they generally, I mean, the IDB has a staff of one. Matt, I'm looking to Matt, but I think they have about a staff of one over there, and they can't do much. And so that they don't have the ability to lead in there. MDHA does. MDHA has a history of it, and MDHA can continue to do that. But we have to do it with the help of the other departments and the city and the administration. This kind of wraps up the committee on the recommendations. I do have one more slide in here that I presented that had what's left. We have a total of almost $250 million in TIF capacity. We have expended about 150 million of it. As you can tell, we got $100 million remaining balance in there. I think people will say I really think people will say MDHA has done a good job administering this with the city, for the city, and for the benefits that come through. I think anybody can go pick out one project and say, you shouldn't have done this, or you should have added this to it. I think hindsight, everybody can go back and pick and choose on things and say, affordability shouldn't have been 5 years, it should have been 15 years. Well, if we were doing it today, we would have had it set up for 15 years. Some of this you have to learn as you go through. But I think overall we've done a good job. This is the balance that we have left to do even more good. So there is $100 million of balance left inside these redevelopment districts. And it's in Jefferson Street, it's in Bordeaux, and then it's in Casey that's going to be helping our project in the Envision Casey when we move forward with that one, with the large amount of infrastructure that's needed up there. Going on, talking about, I have reached the stopping point here.
Can I ask
to talk about, please.
Quickly, going back one slide, the amendment to revisit the plans. Tell me about that amendment. What was done with it? Where has it been placed?
The plans have been amended.
Right.
They were amended last session. That says we need to go back to Metro Council with what our goals are for we need to revisit each redevelopment plan. If we don't revisit each redevelopment plan, then we may not be able to implement a new TIF loan.
All right. So this amendment went on each plan, or was it one amendment that applied across all plans?
Went to each plan.
And was approved by the council?
It was.
All right. So it came through the board. The board took this up. It went to the council, and each plan has been amended and includes these words on this slide.
Correct.
All right. Is there any other council action that occurred as a result of the committee's recommendations?
It was all in one bill where they amended 7 redevelopment districts, I believe it was, the active redevelopment districts were amended that implemented these changes. It implemented the change that Metro Council can start an amendment, can initiate a plan amendment. And that was one of them that went in there as well. Most of it was related to this one thing about coming back to Metro to let them know the priorities are.
We don't need to do it today, but could you send us the bill that passed with all of the provisions that occurred as a result of the committee's action, any analysis that you'd like to provide of what else might have been in there so that we as a new board have all of that? That's the last action of the council dealing with redevelopment districts, right?
Correct.
On the design review discussion that we had a little while ago, we talked about working with the planning department. The planning department has its codes, particularly for the downtown, and has its, but they do not have, and this is my belief. If I'm wrong, consider this a question, but I don't believe that the planning department has design guidelines of a type that we have regarding the structures, the exterior structures, and the way in which they look within a neighborhood. Is that a fair assessment? Why don't you, let's put it as a question. Why don't you talk a little bit about what the design rights of planning are as opposed to the design rights of MDHA?
Most of the planning department's design is form-based, which is the building should be X size across the street frontage. It should be Y height tall. It should be so far off of the street. Most of it is very formed based, and you are correct. It's not about pretty. It's not about it should have bricks on it, and it should have some metal panels on it, or it should have harding panels on it. It doesn't get into, and the roof pitches ought to be sloped up this way or that way. Some of them, especially in the downtown code, though, does go a step further, and they would say that you need to have 60% of the ground floor needs to be clear glass so we can see through. So in the downtown code, it has much more detail as to what the building would look like than it would in some other SP that was done, or where there is an urban design overlay. So it varies with them, not unlike it varies with MDHA. MDHA has established in certain areas some very specific design guidelines. In Phillips Jackson, Hope Gardens has some very strict guidelines on that, where we get into roof pitch. We get into how high the foundation can be off of the ground. So in some places, we have some very specific design guidelines. In others, we have more, much more broad that are building design principles that say the building should be brought up to the street. The materials should be compatible with other buildings in the area. And so in some areas, it is more general. In other areas, it is much more specific. We have the ability, and our plans are written with the ability to bring some very specific guidelines to the board, have the board adopt them, and they would be then implemented by the design review committee. So we have the ability to go that extra step, which we have done in many places. 5 Points is one of them. Hope Gardens is another one. We did Main Street is another one that it has those very strict guidelines on those. We also adopted the Broadway design guidelines for the historic Broadway as well. And so we were implementing those. So in some areas, they are very specific. Otherwise, they will default back to our more broad ones. I hope that answers that question.
No, it does. But I wanted the board to hear that answer, because it also goes to the earlier question that Commissioner Ansari and Commissioner Coleman were raising, because in this area, it is beyond reactive. It is a much greater set of rights. It is collaborative with planning as described, but the rights granted and the authority that Joe, you have been administering is important to be informed by planning, but it's a role over and beyond and quite can be quite aspirational, in fact.
MDHA really got into downtown and the development back in the 80s when we first started with the redevelopment districts, and through the 90s, where Metro was growing at such a rate, the planning department had much more of a shift into the suburbia of how that was going to be, and downtown was kind of left out there. Browning was the director of the planning department at the time. When Mayor, I think you brought in Rick Bernhardt into the city, and when Rick came in, he started making a shift back into the design, starting to get Metro and planning much more involved into that over the course of his tenure at the planning department. But there was, before that, there was this massive void, and then it took a long time before the planning department started to get to where they are today, but they still haven't gotten to the level where MDHA adopts and what they implement.
Right. And well, in fact, it's not clear, except within an SP, that the planning department has the rights or, in fact, the affirmative obligation to act in that regard. I think your point is just right. It's primarily a form-based, and as to the look, the fit, the feel, and potentially other issues, that's within the charge of MDHA within a redevelopment district. Can I ask one more question, just quickly, back to your last slide before you move on to transit-oriented development? Districts impacted in status. That's the full list. I don't see 5 points. Is 5 points already?
5 points expires. Well, all funds have been expended out of 5 points. Number two, 5 points was not amended because it expires in December of this year. Capital Mall was not amended because it doesn't have any funds left in it either. So
right, these there are two more districts that are not on this list.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted the board. We have seen the complete list previously, and was in the earlier report, I think, that was provided to you. On the 5 points in particular, Joe, it's just a thought. I'm not. It's for the board and ultimately for you to decide. 5 points would be a particularly good case study for you as a full cycle of a redevelopment district and what occurred. I happen to know a lot about it because I drive through it every day, at least twice a day. I sort of grew up in that neighborhood as an adult, at least. But it is a place where you can see and think about decisions made over the course of now almost 30 years. It was a modest amount of TIF. Commissioner Coleman would be interested in knowing a modest amount of money involved, I think. But it was transformational, not just for a small redevelopment area, but frankly for a whole set of neighborhoods that surrounded it, and is as good an example as I know of one place where you could look and see what did we do right, what did we do wrong, how did we change a neighborhood, and how did the neighborhood and we work together to make all that happen. Anyway, that's I appreciate this, both the history of what you've done as well as your explaining your feelings. Are you all getting a lot of feedback from some other place? I feel as though there's a small.
It may have been me.
Yes.
Okay, because I'm in California and I know they have all kinds of natural disasters, but I hadn't seen anything out the window that sounded like what I was hearing. Okay, anyway, thank you. I appreciate your all that you've done, and I know you're ready to move on to transit-oriented developments, I guess. Or are you done?
No, well, I can keep on going if you're ready.
We're ready, Joe. Thanks.
All right. Oriented development. This was authorized by the state of Tennessee. The short of it is the state has continued and still continues. There was legislation this year that failed to limit the definition of what blight is. And it was getting to the point of making the declaration of a redevelopment district under the terms and definitions of what blight is almost next to impossible. We got the two that we got in under the definition of blight was Bordeaux, which over half of the area under Bordeaux is the former landfill, which qualified for blight on real and perceived environmental concerns that are out there. And then where Casey is, where we had a very in-depth study that was done of all those buildings and the obsolescence that is contained inside all those buildings. That was our support for why Casey fell under blight. But blight has been one that has been getting more and more difficult to prove over the years. And so we worked with the state legislature. Again, this was at the time when the referendum was in process, that we would create a new definition of blight. And what we called blight was a lack of good transportation. And so that automatically defaults into what is. Here I have a brief graph that shows the difference between the two. It needs to be a corridor where the location could be. It has to be a quarter mile wide, as wide as it can be on either side of the corridor, which means we have it's a half mile wide, but it could run the length of these. This is very important because where these folks are coming out of Nashville, we have all seen the decline of the old strip centers that were all up and down through the area and what has become of those and how difficult it is to redevelop those sometimes, even though they have a rather large amount of land that is already assembled. And so this idea of a transit-oriented redevelopment district can play very well into those things. I'm thinking specifically of out in the Madison area where the old Madison Shopping Square was, and those places, and you can go out any major corridor and you'll be able to see that as it takes through. The eligible development, yeah, I'm sorry.
So, so you said it's a quarter mile on each side of the street, and that's like 1,250 feet, 1,400 feet. How deep is a typical city block? I'm just trying to understand whether or not a quarter mile off each road, I don't know whether it's from the center of the road or from the road's edge, does that get you deep enough to be a city block? I guess is what I'm trying to determine.
You'll get a typical city block, yes, without question. Now, what we're doing though is we're starting to pull out into the suburbs a bit, and the blocks start getting bigger. You know, if you're in an area that's backing up to half-acre lots, you know, you're starting to get fairly well. But still, you know, if you move out, you know, you may be getting up to 100-foot width lots. You're probably, you know, you're probably doubling the size of what you are on the, you know, in the urban core, in the Five Points area, in Jefferson Street area, where it's typically 50 feet by 150 feet lots. You're probably doubling that and getting 100 by 200 or 250. But yes, you ought to be able to incorporate a city block back. When we drew our lines, we were pulling at 1,250 feet. If you go much further than that, you're really starting to get into the heart of that single family neighborhood. So you probably don't want to push much further than that back into that neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Back on TIF. One of the things that we did when we and MDHA was instrumental in writing the legislation of what a transit-oriented development district would be, is we added language in there that said you can actually use it for the physical sticks and bricks of building housing, of building both affordable and workforce housing. That runs all the way up to 120. I put these definitions in. These are the definitions of the state that we are following as the rule under TIF and what's eligible. So affordable is below 60, workforce is 60 to 120 in accordance with TIF and the state laws. And so the idea was the that as you move out into the neighborhood, or out into the suburbs, the price of land is starting to drop down. The way we've been able to incentivize affordable housing in the past is, well, the cost of land was so high, we'll pay for the land and bring the land costs down as the eligible expense. And then you will still require you to build affordable housing, but our expense will be the land. But as you move further out, the land would not be as expensive. And so it's like, well, all right, you bought the land and brought it down to zero, but I still need more TIF, and all I'm building is residential. So to actually build affordable becomes an eligible expense. And so that's been the biggest difference. We also expanded public infrastructure to include these things listed down at the bottom, where we can actually help to construct what is needed to increase transportation. There's language in here, obviously, about the train, because that was being spoken of highly under the last transportation, but it also works for bus and any other types of forms of transportation as well. All right. I think I have my mouse in the wrong place. It's giving me problems. I skipped. Yes. All right. The TIF application approval administrative process. So that was really all I had on the TOD. Is they can go just about anywhere on a corridor with that. And then I wanted you to know, and I think I'm just going to go through this very quickly. I just want you to be aware that we do have a process in place for TIF and for the loans and how they do. We have only TIF can be used, only MDHA TIF can be used inside our redevelopment districts. The IDB can go other places. We really don't work with the IDB. IDB's TIFs must get council approval. Ours, the plan gets council approval, then the TIF drops down on how that goes out, drops down to the board. And the board authorizes the TIF to be expended out on each project. There is a difference on that. We do control it more. It is not strictly a pass through. We do have some guidance and say on that once the plan is approved. This is the way TIF has worked in the past, where we take the increase. What you see there in gray was the incremental taxes and property increase in value that goes to retire the loan. That is what's been kind of driving Metro crazy, because they can't very well predict how much money they're going to have to give back to MDHA to pay for the debt. And so when we refinanced all of the loans and moving forward with new TIF loans, we are going to establish a flat line on what the payment will be on the debt service. And so the debt service will be flat out for a number of years. We will pay that. Any increase in value of the property taxes for a reappraisal or for either a reappraisal or for a property tax increase, which was just passed last month, those increased property taxes will go to Metro government. We will keep a flat line amount of increment taxes coming back to repay our debt for the future. And this gives Metro what they wanted, is a stabilized debt service for us to be able to tell them every year, we would need X amount of dollars from you to retire our debt, and they'll be able to continue to push this through. So this was at a request of Metro. Both council was looking for this, Metro Finance was looking for this, Metro Schools was looking for this, because the way Metro was allocating these things out, it impacted everybody. Where does TIF come from, and how can you get TIF? Again, this is all laid out into our plan. So we have our plans. We have them laid out on our website. We continue to look at our website, trying to make it a little bit better where it can be. I think this is where we have the single stop shop that everybody likes to say, hey, there's a great place. Where do I go to find out about incentives? I think this is where the idea out of the plan was that would be the mayor's office of ECD, and then ECD would pass it back to the right people to be administering it. It doesn't exist right now. Hopefully when things stable out here in the next 6-9 months, maybe that will become an issue. I mean, a reality of what we can do. Our current process, we have a application. We meet with the applicant. We discuss what his project is, whether or not that his project would be, could be deemed eligible for TIF. What is his benefit going to be to the overall plan? That's what we're looking for on the application. Is he value added? Is this project value added? Is it something that the redevelopment district needs? And that's how we take a look at it. We're also looking at the financial end of it. Is there a gap? Why can't this guy not build this project on his own? And sometimes we'll have people come in and they'll say, I can build this project on my own, but I think it'd be neat to have a half-acre park over here that would be open to everybody to be able to do that. And I can't do that on my own. Can I get some TIF from you to build this park over here? And so those are some of the things that we are looking at in part of the application process of what can be done. So staff, my department, we look through those evaluations of how it comes through. We would then, if we think it's a worthwhile project, obviously we would meet with the executive department, and we would talk about that as going on. We'd begin the negotiations of the development agreement. We would get with the development committee to talk about the project, what it's going to be. We obviously have, the development meetings are public, open to the public, and publicly advertised, both at the committee level when we would discuss this and at the board level. So this was put in for those who think that we kind of do all this behind the doors and no one knows what we are doing. The development agreements themselves, these are 5 bullets that we put, requirements that we put on every project. We're looking at the, you have a project description that goes in there. You have the timelines when they have to meet certain deadlines to be able to get tax increment financing. They have the financing requirements about getting the loan, and us being able to review through that. They have a diversified business goal of being able to, their goal is 20% of the overall project, as opposed to 20% of the funding that goes in from our end. And then they have to give us a final report of how they did on that DBE. So the TIF loans are non-recourse to MDHA. I think that's very important. As you all know, since you went through the refinancing, you understand. I think a lot more of this than when I kind of just drafted this up initially. So we also report all loans to state comptroller, and as the loan closes, and you've had some of those come through where we are making reports. Not only does it do it for TIF loans, we're obviously doing it for our other loans for the possible that are being developed. Every loan that we do, we report to the state comptroller. Our reporting, this is our reporting that we do. We send reporting to the state comptroller. We send it to Metro Council and Metro Finance as well. And so, and they're posted online. The state comptroller last year started taking their reports electronically in a very strange form. I'm hoping that they continue to refine their form, because it was much more set up for IDBs than it was for redevelopment districts. And so it was kind of hard for us plugging our data into their system, because they are used to a single project going in, where we are reporting a single redevelopment district that has multiple loans. They have a single project with only one loan. And so it was a little bit difficult to work. So with that said, we are in conversations. Not only are we doing this reporting, we're in conversations with the state comptroller to say, okay, this is what we did. This is how we're doing it. Is this right? Do you feel good about this report? So It's just not something that is just thrown out there and put online. And that is it. So,
Joe,
yes.
I have a question. On the slide where you had the 5 components that included diversification, project description, is there anything in the reporting about impact or community impact or anything like that?
There is not. That is one thing that there is not at the moment. That is one thing that there has been a lot of discussion about, and how does it, and what is the impact that it has on the community? My answer to that has been the impact is what's done for the plan. And you go back to the plan.
Here's what you're breaking up.
I'm sorry, my answer to that is, how does this further the redevelopment plan? The goals of the redevelopment plan by doing this one project. I know there's been conversations about, okay, well, how many people did it employ? Or how many, or what benefit level does it bring to low-income residents, or whatever matrix you want to compare it to, like you do with large-scale municipal projects or state projects. The goal is the redevelopment plan. And so you would compare it to, and what we have been comparing it to is, what does it do for this plan?
And that's probably a good way of doing it. However, if there's any flaw, I mean, and I'm sure sometimes we've made some mistakes with redevelopment plans, it at least points it out, gives the opportunity for redirection or correction.
I agree. I agree with you that there is ample opportunity to do more. I don't disagree with that.
So what is necessary to do more? What does the board need to do more? Or what does the staff need to do more?
I think we need to probably incorporate it more into the actual development agreement. I think, if we are incentivizing, an affordable housing in there, I think we probably ought to be getting ongoing reports as to, what the makeup of those, of those tenants are and their income. People you have, how many households are in there, and get some ongoing data on that, not dissimilar to what we do on the pilots. If it's an affordable housing one, if it is it was a hotel, got the room block agreement, because we did the hotels that we've done were all associated with the convention center, with the MCC. We did the Joseph Hotel that had a room block agreement with the Convention Center Authority, and also had the parking agreement with the National Symphony. The Westin Hotel had the room block with the Convention Center Authority, and the Omni Hotel. All of those were blocked back in, and are getting impacts and are providing benefits to the convention center on that. So it's going to depend on what the project is as to what other type of additional matrix we want to add in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have an observation. So we have TIF under MDHA that MDHA administers. And then Metro also has TIF under IDB. And those loans can be used anywhere in the district. So I'm just wondering about the overlay. That you said they have one staff. So where does the person go to understand how that program operates? Maybe Commissioner Purcell can provide help with that and see how it compares to what MDHA is responsible for and working on.
Thank you, Kay, very much. That sort of foresaw a question that I had for Joe. I do think it was not part of your presentation today, but it would be worth at a follow-up meeting, hearing about that, and because the IDB is actually a very different thing, and it's carried on the books of the city in a very different way. Interestingly, it has a different history, and it has a different, as Joe has suggested, a different political formulation and connection to the city. The IDB is actually appointed by the Metro Council, not by the mayor. The IDB, in fact, there was a rather extensive lawsuit back 30 or 40 years ago, Joe. I think it even predates you, where the mayor, then Mayor Fulton, attempted to actually appoint the members of the IDB, and the case resolved that there is no authority in the mayor for that appointment. Now, the finance has the ability to oversee their books and their accounts because they sit within the city, but their effect on the city's balance sheet, it's a different animal, as you're suggesting. And so I think it would be great to take your question and build on it for another presentation, just so that we would have an understanding. I think the understanding you want to have, and it might look like this, Joe and Jim. What is this total TIF that we have? Let's look at it over time. We have that data. What have the numbers been like over 30 years? Trend data, size, amounts? How does that compare to the other major metropolitan areas in the state? Memphis, Chattanooga, Knoxville, Clarksville, if you want, if that's useful. You might also, in that presentation, look at there's one other board, right? There's the Health and Educational Board, which is in the same space as the IDB and has some similarities, but is a different item. And then on pilot, it's not central to this presentation, but just to capture that question that Kay has and move it out a little more globally, the pilot numbers for Nashville, the pilot numbers for Memphis, the pilot numbers for Chattanooga, the pilot numbers for Knoxville or Clarksville if you want. I think that would Kay, begin to help us get our arms around the entirety of this and where we fit into it. And then one more piece, which is that question of what are they allowed to do that we're not? Joe's right. The geographic restrictions are different, but so are ultimately their ability to act. I know, Joe, you're not prepared to talk about that today, but Kay's question was much on my mind. If I know the mind of this group of commissioners, I suspect Kay has raised a question that's on many minds in this meeting today, and that would just help us understand then the totality. It doesn't need to be August; it could be September, I think, but certainly before we get to this important time in the fall when we have to begin reporting back to the council and so forth, it'd be good for us to have a sense of all of that. Joe, is that something you could do?
Yes, I can. I think I'm going to reach out and have to get a little bit of help, but yes, I think we can put this together.
I think the controller may have that as well.
It's a pretty extensive task, and we have consultants at hand that we could have assisted with it, but we also have other tasks, as you know, on the task list. So just a prioritization might be helpful, but we can do it certainly over time, and we'll just have to research the time sensitivity of it.
Certainly. Jim, I think actually the comptroller probably has everything I asked for, but available. But we can check with the comptroller first, Joe.
Yes, that'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Joe or comments? I would like to acknowledge that Commissioner Campbell, I believe, joined the call in her majority of this presentation. So Commissioner Campbell, I just wanted to say hello and acknowledge that you've been with us.
Hello, this is Bishop Campbell. I've been with you all.
Excellent, thank you. I also just, in terms of additional business, I just wanted to update the commissioners that it is at our next meeting that we plan to be presented with the budget. And so we are just 1 month delayed, everything that has happened in our crazy world these days. And I also wanted to thank Commissioner Ansari. My understanding is that he's met with staff and leadership and has worked to advance the idea of having a really simple kind of dashboard or some key visual metrics that we'll be able to look at moving forward that help us understand our budget and our progress over time in a fashion that hopefully is very transparent and easy to understand, since our budget is not. So thank you for that. Does anyone else have any additional business before we adjourn? Yes.
So Emily, one thing I'd like to try to get us, excuse me, Commissioner Thaden, like for us to get to get on is actually setting up the time to actually have the discussion. So we got a very robust, in detail brief in the last 2 meetings around TIF, and there's questions to be debated. A frame of reference for us to come into consensus on is really now saying, well, who's going to set the agenda to actually discuss our frame of reference? You know, is it administrative and in nature, or is it more, or as Commissioner Purcell said, is it really a reactive, or are we being proactive in the things we do? We kind of straddle the line. I'd like to, and I know Jim, our executive director is now making the point to call to get agenda items in advance, but I do feel like that we need to start taking some of these things from informational, that's been given to us from informational purposes, and really start saying, well, where are we as an agency, as a board, and begin to document that on a go-forward basis.
Yes, I appreciate that. I want to be mindful of the timeline, because before the fall, there is a lot for Joe's team to do. And so I think what I would like to recommend is that we add that to the on board Excel spreadsheet that I think we will touch upon in the full board meeting. And maybe that is something that can be slated for November or December, if that makes sense. And so we can carve it out and make sure that there is a clear timeline for when we're going to revisit that discussion and actually get to hopefully some action steps with what some of that discussion yields. How does that sound to others? And Joe, I'm particularly interested in hearing your thoughts on this, since you're the one who has to help us do this.
Obviously, the more time, the more thorough you can get into it. But we can. I'm pleased to be able to, bring staff into it. They like this. They are very pleased on this. They like what they are doing. They like the results that are done. And so anything that would help you better understand, we'll be able to get on that and get some stuff done.
And this is Jim. I appreciate Joe's enthusiasm. Please call in mind he has a person who watches the phone, 2 other staff, and himself. We do have Innovative Capital under contract, and so let me take a look at the tasks. It is not an insignificant one in scope, and Joe does have other things that are required to do that we have to meet the timelines on. So we'll put that on the list, and Mayor Purcell or Commissioner Purcell, Board Chair, and I will meet and sequence it, and then come back to you on what we think the timeline is. But we do have a lot on our plate, and we've accelerated as an example, we've accelerated our financial budget process by a month, starting in April. So everything that we did a year ago, we're doing a month sooner. For staff, that's a bit challenging, including Joe. He still has to present his budget to me and be approved, which means there'll be challenges probably. So that process has to work through with the same staff that's taking on new tasks. So we're going to get it all done. It's just we got to sequence it so we don't drop any other balls. And I think that's the purpose of my weekly meeting with the board chair.
I agree. This is Bill Purcell. I am interested, Joe, in knowing you're going to have to make a report, or you're planning to make a report back in October, as I understood what you said, to the council in this area. And I think if I'm reading Commissioner Ansari correctly, this discussion is part and parcel of both what you're going to report back, which I think will need to know something about before the report is made, and ultimately then informs the conversation going forward in the way that he's described. So I'm comfortable. We'll set an agenda, as Jim indicated, and then it's in the hands of the board, because the board can decide that's quick enough or it's not. for our purposes. But I think we're all in the same place here, and I appreciate Jim. The good news, Jim, is that if you do things sooner, my mother used to say, if you do something sooner, then you have some free time on the other side. But that's I never lived by that, but my mother explained it to me many times. So anyhow, thank you all very much. And Joe in particular, thanks for exactly what I hoped we would do, a broad cover of a subject that needed this much time. And I appreciate both the members and our chair's efforts to get this done in a way that informs, hopefully, our service together going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Any final thoughts before we adjourn?
Just one housekeeping item. There was a mention of the fact that the safety plan was distributed to all the commissioners. I just want to make sure everybody got that. Was that in anybody's package? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Excellent. All right. Thank you.
Saul, was the magic language used to, this was only informational, we didn't have any votes, but did we use the executive, the executive order's magic words? This is an important part of your work, I know.
I was waiting for somebody to ask me, so I really appreciate that you gave me this moment to shine. So, but generally speaking, this meeting was held in accordance with the executive order issued by the governor related to virtual meetings. The meeting was recorded and can be viewed on YouTube for a later time, and the public was invited to participate. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
You're certainly welcome. And at some other point, I'd love to know what our YouTube ratings are like. But in any event, I'm ready to, Madam Chair, I'm ready to adjourn for 5 minutes if that's possible.
Yes, let's adjourn and we will meet back here at 11:30.
Thank you.